Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. I'm going to share with you a comment that one of my patrons sent to me a couple of hours ago. She actually lives in Sandwich, which is where the current police search is going on, and I'm going to tell you what I think they're looking for, as well as something else significant, something that is an important bearing on the case. So this is from one of the patrons on my Patreon site. She says, police presence still very much in force in Sandwich today, although not to the same level as yesterday. No helicopters. There are still many areas cordoned off, including the Riverwalk opposite Manwoods Road, where a school is located, and the Co-op car park, where the police have been going through the clothes and the donation skip and various other areas. I understand a piece of jewelry was found on top of the pay machine in the Co-op car park and bagged as evidence. And as far as I know, that is a reference to a gold chain that was found, or a gold necklace. So we don't know just as yet whether that did belong to Sarah. Possibly her family could confirm this, or even her boyfriend. She says, unfortunately, I couldn't speak with the police. It is not possible to stop close or indeed get any decent photographs apart from as we pass by in the car, and I'm not forceful enough to try. She says, I will send pics over anyway, which includes a map of the area next to the school, which has been cordoned off. It is a pathway that runs next to the river, and I think that river is the Delft stream. And so it's kind of a waterway that they're looking at. And she says that her daughter tells her there was also police presence at the station. Not sure why that would be. And she goes on to say, I'll keep my eyes peeled when I'm back in Sandwich tomorrow. So I'll tell you what I think they are looking at. There is a reference to this in a Daily Mail article from, when is it? It is from the 16th of March, so just yesterday. And what they say in that article is that police investigating the murder are looking down or looking through a network of drains below the town, and what they're actually searching for is her mobile phone. Now, we've already gotten a sense from Couzens himself, that he is behaving erratically and so on. I don't know whether he would, whether everything that he's doing is supposed to be a show of remorse or a show of mental instability. But obviously, if it was remorse, all you had to do was ask him, what did you do with the phone? And possibly he just said he threw it out the window. So it's possible that he did give information, but the phone has now been moved due to storm water and all that kind of thing. And I think you've also got to ask the question, why do the police want her phone? It's possible that the phone can provide GPS details. It's also possible that possibly she tried to make a call on her phone, and maybe they want to try and assess what the situation was of the battery, which will give an indication of perhaps the time that the crime happened. Did the crime happen while she was talking on the phone, or because her battery died? And so that is possibly why the phone is of some importance. I've also gone through some of the news media coverage where they sort of say something about everything we know about Wayne Couzens or something. And it's just incredible how one-dimensional and how limited the efforts are to find out who a person is. The Telegraph, who you'd expect would do quite a good job, describes him as a wonderful father, and he wouldn't ever do anything like this, so unhelpful stuff like that. And then there's also a little bit about him doing firearms training, the fact that he was born in Dover, Kent in 1972. This is a little bit helpful that he was the eldest of two boys whose family ran a garage and a car shop. Now, something that I just think is worth pointing out, not that it's very it's not really rocket science, but Mr. Couzens, his family ran a garage and a body shop. So did Chris Watts. Chris Watts also was a mechanic, and so was Ronald DeFeo, and to some extent so was Peter Sutcliffe. They were all involved to some extent in fixing machines, right? Further down in the Telegraph article, it describes neighbors in Deal describing the Couzens family as the perfect family who doted on their two children, unhelpful stuff like that. Obviously, if they were such a perfect family, this wouldn't be going on. It's the same sort of thing we heard with the Chris Watts case. You shouldn't be saying all the good things you can think about a person in a true crime scenario. You should be trying to think about things that are helpful, things that stood out that weren't necessarily good, that aren't endorsements. I think a hairdresser, Kerry Slade, spoke about her eyewitness accounts, and she said she saw their daughter in uniform, and she spoke about when they moved into the area, and then also that she saw them walking. When she was walking their dog, she saw them at 8:30 a.m. on Monday. And then she goes on to say, this is a quote from the article, "I know the man is building stuff in his garden, getting work done recently. He is a police officer. I saw him in his uniform. He was a biker, and you'd often see him in the garage working on his motorbike," end quote. Now, I know someone who is part of a biking club in the area that I stay, and there's quite a lot of machismo involved. There's a certain amount of libido involved in bikers. Certainly that seems to be part of what they're trying to convey. One wonders to what extent that's part of Couzens' narrative, part of his story. I do think it's valuable evidence here, the fact that he was apparently building or doing some kind of construction in his garden up until the time of this crime. First of all, because of the fact that the remains of poor Sarah Everhard were found in a builder's bag. Personally, I think the Mirror did perhaps a better job in providing some backstory on Couzens, describing his 2 years in the Army Reserves, also describing him as the eldest of two boys, a mechanic at a Dover garage run by his family, and it closed in 2015. So that closure may be something that has affected him, right? It's something that has now changed when his father, Ray, retired. He was also a member of the Army Reserves. He served in the 3rd Battalion, and you sometimes see him wearing military fatigue. So you kind of get the sense that he's someone who enjoys his role as a kind of a man's man, mechanic, a biker, a sort of military figure. In 2018, he transferred to the Met Police, so now he's moving away from the whole thing, the whole mechanic thing, the whole auto thing, and is becoming more of a law enforcement character, if I can put it that way. And then we know that he worked for the Westminster-based Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Command. He was protecting VIPs, but you get the sense that he would be standing on the street looking on as these important people passed him by. And so he sort of hung around the Palace of Westminster, Downing Street, and various embassies in that area. He was primarily assigned to guard embassies in London, and he was working a 6-hour relief shift at the American Embassy, about 3 miles from where Sarah Everhard went missing on the night of the abduction. So he worked until about 8 p.m. that night. The part that I want to emphasize in this video is basically the assumption that did the Ripper inspire Wayne Couzens? And I'm referring here obviously to the Netflix miniseries. It's a documentary series of 4 episodes. I don't think it's a coincidence that the hashtag Reclaim Our Streets and the episode Reclaim the Night, directed by Elena Wood, on the 16th of December, well, that was when it was released last year. Basically, all 4 episodes came out in the middle of December last year, and this crime happened in very early March. So, if you assume that Couzens didn't get to watch it immediately when it came out, I know I didn't, and perhaps watched it sometime in January, then it might have taken the month of February to sink in, right? The other thing that I think is worth considering is if he did watch the Netflix documentary, I've been covering it as a series on Patreon, just dealing with his confession, Peter Sutcliffe's confession, dealing with the incidents as they occurred, and what comes through when you go through it victim by victim is how ridiculously easy it seemed to be for Peter Sutcliffe to perpetrate his acts and then get away with them. And I wonder whether this didn't sow a seed in the mind of Wayne Couzens. Obviously, I'm speculating, but there's a reason for this. Previously, when I wrote the book Not All Who Wander Are Lost on Nora Corrin, I also observed that the Madeleine McCann documentary, The Disappearance of Madeleine McCann, which also appeared on Netflix, occurred just a couple of months prior to the incident with Nora Corrin. And of course, the Corrins immediately said there was a pedophile abductor involved, there was an abduction and so on, and there was no evidence for that. So what sort of educated them to such an extent on this? And I wouldn't be surprised if it was the disappearance of Madeleine McCann, which comes across as an authoritative guidebook or blueprint on what to do in a similar situation. With Nora Corrin, you had also someone going on holiday in a foreign country, a window being open, and suddenly that means you have a pedophile abductor. And then how do you deal with a situation like that? Well, you don't go to the police, you go to the media. You get your PR up and running, and that's not going to solve the case. Did it work in the Madeleine McCann case? No. Did it work in the Nora Corrin case? No. And so you then criticize the police and so on, and then what happens is you have the police at odds with the victim's family, and nothing, it's not resolved. And so there's at present continued disagreement and controversy and bickering and lack of consensus following the inquest into Nora Corrin's death. Something else that I feel quite strongly about is that the Chris Watts case predated the Patrick Frazee case. Both of them happened in Colorado, and it feels like possibly Patrick Frazee looked at the Watts case and thought, wow, if you just got rid of the phone, you could have gotten away with this kind of thing. And then Patrick Frazee seemed to have learned from the Watts case and tried to improve on what he did. And, well, he did improve, but he didn't get very far. Then you've got other cases in Colorado, like the Letitia Stork case, Gannon Stork, and also Suzanne Moore-Few. One wonders whether there's not some intertextuality there, whether these people were also stressed. They were looking on at these cases and thinking, I could do that, or I could do that better. Now, obviously it's speculation, but if Wayne Couzens did watch The Ripper, and as a policeman you can imagine that he would have thought, wow, the police were totally outfoxed by The Ripper for 5 years. They didn't know what was going on, and perhaps he saw the genius, I guess, in what the Ripper did, and also perhaps saw what were the weaknesses in the Ripper's modus operandi. I wouldn't be surprised if he thought, well, you don't take your own vehicle to the scene of the crime, so you could say perhaps he learned that lesson, and so he hired a car. You might also say, why from this is obviously from a criminal perspective, why perpetrate a crime in a public area that you don't feel have control over, and then leave the victim there as well, rather abduct her and take her somewhere else. It's going to be harder to find her, and then you also get more, I'm trying to think of a sensitive way to say this, you also get more, let's just say, time with the victim, right? And that raises the question, where did Wayne Couzens take Sarah, and how did he transport her, if she was conscious or was she not conscious? And so, how did he subdue her in order to drive to where he needed to go? Did he have a gun? How did he do that? So the part that I think is definitely an important question is, did he think that he could take Sarah home? So was that his plan, to take Sarah home, given that his wife Elena was home? Now, I think what is quite an interesting parallel between the Ripper and Wayne Couzens, besides the fact that they both knew their way a little around cars and engines and working with machines, auto bodies or whatever, I think another parallel is that they were both married at the time. In the Ripper case, his wife Sonia didn't know what he was up to, and he did what he did for 5 years without Sonia figuring it out. That does seem hard to believe, but that is apparently what happened. Now, in this case, is it the same scenario? So what I do think is interesting, and this is referred to in the Daily Mail a couple of days ago. Let's just check the date of it. I think it was the 12th of March. There's a photo of what appears to be abandoned garage, a sort of a derelict garage, and it was previously owned by the Couzens family, so it's basically been empty for about 6 years, right? And what is interesting is that these garages back into tunnels, so you can imagine possibly a scenario where you could drive with a person into this garage area that you now are familiar with, and then once your action or whatever, the crime that ever the criminal wants to commit has been committed, he can then make use of these tunnels to dispose of the remains. It's not clear whether that happened. I don't quite know how they work or whatever, but it's possible that he could have done that and then, almost in a relay process, moved the body further and further away to eventually dispose of her remains where he disposed of them. I think it's a mistake to sometimes assume the disposal is done a single time. I think it's done sometimes with the time that is allowed, and then possibly when there's more time or opportunity, the disposal is then increased. So say the distance or whatever is then increased. And now I just want to highlight something that I think Wayne Couzens, if he was inspired by the Ripper, forgot about. The Ripper committed his crimes with fairly rudimentary equipment. It was often just a knife and a hammer and a vehicle. That was basically his modus operandi. It tended to be prostitutes who were often drunk, so they were compromised, and he seemed to do whatever he did very quickly and in situ. Now, what I think, if Couzens was copying the Ripper or inspired by the Ripper, I think what he may have forgotten is that in the 40 to 45 years since the crime happened in 1975, between 1975 and 1980, is that a couple of things have changed significantly. One of them is CCTV cameras, I'm pretty sure he would have been aware of that and perhaps made provision for that. But another thing that he perhaps wasn't aware of or wasn't sufficiently aware of was, for example, dash cam cameras, right? And that seems to be what was his undoing, was his foil, the killer's foil in this case. And then another thing that is to some extent new, although it would be difficult to imagine that he wouldn't know about this, is cell phone technology. And we know that that to some extent played a role in figuring out where Sarah disappeared. And I think bringing the cell phone technology, the dashcam technology, and identifying the Uber drivers in the area, also the London buses, all of that would have helped the authorities locate the area where Sarah disappeared. Another thing that I think is interesting, and I have highlighted it before in this episode, is that the Ripper crimes, when they happened, led to protests by a lot of women who protested what they thought was sexism, and they also wanted to quote unquote reclaim the night. In fact, one of the episodes, the third episode in the series, is Reclaim the Night, and you're having exactly the same thing happening now under the hashtag Reclaim the Street or Reclaim these streets. And one wonders if you say, well, no, I don't think Couzens saw the Ripper or was inspired by the Ripper. Well, what about the people who are supporters of Sarah Everhard? What about the women who are being activists now? Is that just coincidence that it's a similar response to what happened when the Ripper did what he did? Is it just a coincidence, or do you think it could be that this has become part of the zeitgeist and perhaps people have forgotten what they know and how they know it? What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.